Hello. So as Aldis said, I'm Muntis. I'm going to give a speech about using artificial intelligence as a pair, meaning essentially how we can utilize the newest advancements in AI technology to help ourselves to work, to be more efficient, to work better, and hopefully it makes the job easier for all of us. So first, a little bit about the company. Aldis already introduced us as Emergn, so I'm not gonna repeat that too much. I'm just gonna mention that we are really a mission-driven company, and our mission is to improve the way people and companies work. By that meaning that we are really focused on outcomes and on value, and that we always try to leave the knowledge and improve knowledge of people rather than just trying to do the work ourselves. And I think this will be a great kind of way on how to tie it in with the topic, given the tool is also trying to help you work. So a little bit about myself. I'm a data scientist at Emergn. My background is a little bit into data warehouses and prototyping in general. Always been a fan of the fun side of math and statistics, meaning that I always liked the concept that you can prove things that you naturally have by feeling, by somehow finding it and discovering that in the data. So without further ado, so agenda, we went through the intro. I'm gonna show you a little bit of kind of history and a little bit around what Copilot is and how it works, because it's a tool available for everyone to use, and I hope most of us are at least software development related people in this room, so everyone can go in and try it out and click it yourselves and read documentations, and that's boring and you can do it home alone. So I'm going to talk a little about the history and around and some fun stuff around it. So I'll start by just going into the Copilot. So what is GitHub Copilot? It's essentially autocomplete on steroids. So it will help for you to write your code and complete large portions of it way faster by giving you smart suggestions. You can super easily access to it via going into the GitHub and enabling it, and then it works in most of the kind of larger popular IDEs. You install it as add-on, you log in your GitHub account, and it will work as a autocomplete version. And the kind of unique part about this one is that it will not only try to complete specific kind of words and variables or things like that in the code, but it will also look into kind of other files and will look into comment sections as well. And it will try to complete the whole code blocks. So in this example, for example, someone write that he wants to write a sentiment function, and then it automatically found this kind of example that could work with you. And it works in many languages and in most of the big IDs, as I said already. So, but how does it work? And to prove you that it's not magic, or at least I don't think it's magic, I'll tell a little bit about the history. So it's a tool developed by a company called OpenAI, which is essentially established to be the biggest competitor with Google, the Google Brain, DeepMind. And OpenAI is founded by many big investors initially, one of them being Elon Musk. He has left the board of the company for now, but still is part of still is one of the donors. So the mission of the company is to ensure that artificial intelligence is being available to the general public, because as we all know, these Googles and Facebooks and Microsofts and all the huge companies, they have some kind of large data science capabilities and models and compute power and things like that. And So it starts to get more and more consumed by big companies, maybe somewhere in the background, and then not everyone has the access to that. So they're trying to kind of change it by allowing certain models and things that you could use for your own solutions to be exposed. So yeah, it's one of the kind of open AI companies. They're not truly kind of open and non-profit. They separated at some point because that's kind of a little bit of my theory. Is they partnered with Microsoft about the same time when Elon Musk left the board, and they moved to API as a model by giving an API access to their models instead of giving them models directly. They have lots of other accomplishments. In the second talk today, we're going to talk about the DALL-E, the GP3. I will cover that, but they have other interesting projects done by them as well. So one of their accomplishments is GPT-3. You might have heard about the name. I wanted to cover a little bit about the background and other projects and how it came up to eventually be the Copilot, because I don't think everyone in this room is as much interested in data science as I am. So what is GPT-3? It's yet another large language model. To more precise, it's a transformer model. What does it mean? It means it's a huge model developed by OpenAI to essentially try to understand the context and contents of a text and trying to do some tasks based around that. So these large models, they are typically trained by feeding them a lot of text and trying to predict the next word or sometimes next sentence or similar fashion. What does it mean? It means that over time, these models, they are kind of self-adjusting. That's the whole concept of machine learning. They start to understand some concepts about language, that some things can have certain properties, some things cannot. Some concepts have different meanings or can be used in a particular way, and through the language, they start to internally build some kind of a concept of a world and things. And here, just to show that it's those who are into NLP, they probably have heard about the BERT models or the T5. GPT is that, but an order of magnitude larger, at least the largest version. This is logarithmic scale. And kind of one crucial element about the GPT-3 is instead of being trained for a particular task, which a lot of these language modules initially were, it's tried to train to be task agnostic, meaning that via reading billions of documents, it's trying to understand these kind of underlying concepts of language and the world. So I'll show some visualizations. They're a bit more laggy there than on my screen, how the models work. So you feed in some text. These texts are publicly available, typically large corpuses of text for different benchmarking tests and things like that. And most of these huge models are trained on all of the available of data sets. And you give it some kind of a task, and you try to provide it an output, and you let it self-adjust for some time, which is called training, to get to the desired output. You do this over billions of iterations and billions of examples, and you end up with a model that is a super complex mathematical function to which you can give certain inputs, and you can run it in a way that it tries to get the outputs there as well. So in this case, someone has asked the model to continue or recite the first law of the robotics or respond to a statement, and that's kind of the output of it. So once this large model exists, it's able to kind of generalize some of the concepts in some language, and via feeding it a lot of text, it starts to understand a bit more like larger texts and more precise queries. And then to use it in particular use cases like translation or understanding of numerics, or what we will later see, understanding code and giving examples of that, or things like open questions. They are all done in the same way, which is slightly adjusting the outputs of this same huge model. But the idea here is that Google has spent around $1 million to train the model itself, but then afterwards everyone can use it. Sorry, not Google, but OpenAI. Another kind of key component of this one is that most large language models before this one was built to do a specific task, meaning you input a specific question and you want one specific answer. So for this one, it's built to do what's called zero-shot training, meaning that typically, as I said in the previous language models, you would give either the original translation models, just you do examples with translation and you get an output. For later ones, you do few-shot training, meaning that you try to do it generalized and then you try to slightly adjust the outputs by giving it few shots, meaning few examples to get an output. Then try to do it with less, try to give it one specific task with one specific output, and then try to get the other answers that match the same kind of logic. And then the zero shot is just giving it the task with task description. And this is what GPT-3 is trying to do. You give it an input and it will try to give you an output. There's an interesting videos. The presentation will be shared. I have the sources mostly in the bottom, so it's a bit better explanations in those. So what have people built with this tool? A lot of interesting things, since part of the language corpus is program code as well, things like GitHub, open repositories, and things like that. People experimented with it a bit and essentially figured out that you can actually generate a code with it. And what does it mean? You describe an input that you want an HTML that have certain elements, that it has Google logo, for example, there in the middle with a search button at the bottom, and the output is, instead of translation to another language or answer to an open question, the output is actually a working HTML code with some bugs here and there, but this was quite early and the model was not trained to essentially be used like this. Turns out it works actually quite well. Then people tried different other interesting things, which for me just shows that the model indeed is able to generalize the understanding of language to a certain degree. So for example, here you give it a explanation on that you want an integral from A to B of function t, blah, 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 some math to generate a LaTeX, that's a computer notion for formulas and stuff, to show you the example, which for me is great because I think everyone who has tried to use either LaTeX or a Microsoft inbuilt the function drawing thing, everyone knows that they are quite annoying and sometimes difficult to get to work. But if a professor reads a formula to you, you can write it as it's meant to be, always. So that's an interesting use case as well. There are a few others, like trying to give the GPT-3 a first-class homework. So if you say that one kid has some balloons and the other one has more, and you add them up or subtract them, it will be able to understand the text, comprehend, and give you an answer. And not only the answer, but also the kind of calculations, what it gave through, give it variables, and everything like that. So as you know, kids don't just give the answer, they have to give the explanation as well. So at least it's passing the first grade test. Another interesting usage is to also generate graphs, meaning in this case, I think it's given a data set behind the scenes to kind of point to a specific file. and then you say, okay, so show me a scatter plot showing minimum temperatures, show these as labels, color by specific class, and it will give you an output. Behind the scenes, it's of course generating the text that will generate this image, but it did that from a free natural language text. So a little bit of fun as well. People try to adapt the exact same model to complete images with some interesting results, giving a part of an image and then letting the model do the completion on its own. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes a bit creepy, but in the next talk, we're going to talk about the image models that are a bit more comprehensive for this one. So you can use this version of the same model to generate memes probably faster than your Facebook wall can. Okay, so let's move to the next step. So OpenAI Codex. It is essentially a GPT-3 that is specifically tailored to translate natural language to code. So a larger portion of an input data was code examples. And as we all know, at least some developers add comments to their code. And comments typically describe what the following function will do. And if you get where I'm going, it turns out that by looking at enough code like that, you are able to generate code not only from kind of typing and giving some hints, but you can also do that by, from comments of the code or starts of a class definition and things like that. And it's not really tied to one specific language. Though it works the best in Python and JavaScript, and then there's a bunch of others that it still works quite great, but I think those two are the best examples for now. And since it generates code, you can also do not only a typical application, but some things that can be achieved via code, which I'm going to show you in a quick demo just from their website, so you can open it on your computer at the same time as well. So OpenAI Codex, what can it do is, this is an example. I'm not going to go through all of the kind of video here, but the idea is that you give it prompts to do a specific thing. It knows it has to generate JavaScript, and it is generating a JavaScript code on a side. And you can do it incrementally. Here, they're trying to create a really simplistic game where you ask to animate a rocket. First, it asks to import an image, then it asks to animate it, to move around. Later on, it will add more complex steps, like adding a meteor that's bouncing, and if they collide, then it generates, you lose some points, and eventually, I think the game ends. And then they add an user input where if you click on the little rocket ship in the middle, it kind of jumps a bit faster. So you can try to dodge the rocks. Not really probably a fun game, but this game is created in like 5 minutes, so it's pretty great. And as I mentioned, it's great not only at generating JavaScript. It can write other language code as well. It knows about the typical kind of usage of the language and typical libraries as well. As I said, it's all trained on large corpus of GitHub data. And is it running? Yeah. So they start with some hello world examples. Ask to say hello world louder, and by louder it understands that sometimes all caps is considered shouting. But now they're asking to import a UI library without giving it the exact library name. They ask to create a UI with the 10 buttons that says the same thing. It generates some code, and it actually shows up a simple UI, meaning that we have some kind of a connection between the input prompts, the comments in this case, and the code itself. Pretty neat. I'm going to skip the data science one because it's just more Python code but with different libraries. You can also do similar things with any place where you have an API or learn how to write a code. I'm going to show. So for example, here they have an add-on which you give in the prompt, and it will generate a microcode for Microsoft Word to do some formatting of the text. And I think this could be pretty helpful, I think especially with people like accessibility issues and things like that, to enable for them to do some work. Or I would do some of it as well, like to remove all formatting or find specific words, color them a specific way. It's sometimes faster than finding way through the layers of Word menus. Yeah, and this is the example of a homework. So about a Copilot. A Copilot is a tool built on top of this Codex. So the Codex was the GPT-3 tuned for the code. Copilot is a Codex that's implemented as an AI assistant for your code writing. Everyone that has a GitHub account can go in the preferences or just find the Copilot sheet. You can opt in. 2 months is free. Afterwards, I think it's $10 per month. So it is a service. There is an interesting option here in the middle that allows for you to not allow suggestions that directly match some other code somewhere in the world. You can opt it out, and also you can opt out of using your code snippets to improve the Copilot in the future. As I said, it's available for the most of the bigger IDs, these and others. You can just get the quick start in this link. And I'm going to just go now a bit more over in the detail to the Copilot examples. So I showed you here that it's able to generate some JavaScript code. It's not limited to JavaScript, as I mentioned. It has some understanding of other elements in the code as well. So you can generate larger text. So for example, here, we initially asked to create a table in Golang, and afterwards did some other query, and it's able to kind of link back to what was given before, so the existing columns, and then write the text. But these are strings, so it's able to understand some of the text, not only some objects and classes like your typical autocomplete. Similar in Python, but I'm going to show you a little bit of a live demo. Hopefully it runs best. So I downloaded a publicly available dataset about metal vans. It's a bit outdated, but the use for this is to load the data. I'm using Visual Studio Code with the OpenAI Copilot plugin. And what we'll try to do is typically you would see, so dataset looks like this. There is a band name, fans, and when the band is formed, and then some other tags and other things like that. And you might even bigger, okay. Yep, I hope it's somewhat readable. You can show it. So for example, here I would be maybe interested in seeing which countries have the most metal bands, and I can try to give it a prompt. It's a live demo, so it will probably fail, but I have a backup as well. So show band counts by origin is the name of the column. I give it a new line, and then it'll say print, and here it gave me this gray thing is the suggestion. It did something weird, as expected. It doesn't always work great, of course. You have to kind of understand a little bit about how it works. It's sometimes really sensitive to specific use of lingo, so you can't really not know how to do it on your own and just hope it will work. You have to give it proper lingo and sometimes things you want to do. So yeah, okay, so I'll do it kind of step by step, which will be, so group, so add total number of bands per region. And then here is the part that it tried to generate. I'm not sure if it will work again, but it seems like it's going to group the data frame, which is the table, by the origin, and then add the size column to it. But I don't think that's what I actually wanted it to do. Okay, I'm going to do it step by step like my cheat here. Oh, I know maybe what's the error. I'm going to reset because I did run this before. Try to see what it did. Very fun. Sorry about this. I'm not sure why it did work like that the first time. But Davis will show you some example with JavaScript, and hopefully his demo goes better than mine. No pressure.
No pressure, Copilot?
No pressure. Yeah, let's blame Copilot. So here, I give it another prompt to, again, a total number of bands by origin to data frame. I'm intentionally using the same kind of lingo that's used in the table. It's not called country, it's called origin. So I'm using that as well. And here it was able to create a new data frame with the content. And what will it say if I say show top 5 countries with the most metal bands? See, it's even trying to give me the prompt for the comment. And then if I start printing, it says n largest total bands. So let's run that. So here, see, this is working as expected. And then it will say show number of total bands in Latvia. Are there any metal bands in Latvia? Let's see. By this data, it says that there's 24 metal bands in Latvia in 2017. Sometimes it works better, sometimes a bit worse. Once you get used to it, it's actually pretty good. You can also open like a backend panel. Here it's going to show you it's synthesizing multiple solutions, and you're trying to select the one you need. So in these cases where it gave you the wrong answer, there might be another one. So if I ask it something like show total, show number of bands in number of fans in Latvia, it should give me the So here are only two solutions. It typically gives you kind of way more variants, and it will generate larger functions and classes and things like that. Another example, I'll try to redeem myself a little bit, is create a new kind of idea. So let's try to do some simple definition of a card deck, and then some typical functions you might want to add. So define, so simple card deck example class. Class card deck, and as you can see here, I'm going to close this one. It's trying to give me a prompt for, okay, if you want a class, it thinks it's going to be named card deck. It will have some typical things. As we know, cards are from number 1 to 14, being the kind of jack, queen, and king is there as the numbers, and 4 suits. And it has some basic functions like shuffle and like deal. So you can auto-complete it, and it did all of that just from the comment I wrote there at the top. So I'll give word to Davis. Hopefully he will show something that that works as well. I'm going to give you the mic as well.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Davis, and I work with building tools for software developers using web technologies. And so I, in day-to-day life, use a lot of JavaScript. And today I'll show you an example, for example, where we're going to define a AWS Lambda function that saves some data in a table and write some tests for it with the assistance of Copilot. So let's start. So first we, of course, would need to import some libraries that AWS supports. And let's see. There we go. It already knows what library I need to import to work with Amazon Web Services. And here we get a suggestion for the S3 storage. That's not the one we need. You can cycle through different suggestions with shortcuts, and we need to get to the DynamoDB. So this we're actually going to select. And I guess it already knows from my previous tries that I was using UUID to generate unique IDs for the data. So I'll select this one as well. And let's skip this one and define a comment for a function that we're going to write. So let's create a new book. And based on the context, it already knows how, in general, the handler functions for AWS are needs to be defined. And in this case, it provided a simple function with, but since I want to use a synchronous function, I'll adjust the code here a bit. And based on that, the Copilot is actually going to generate different content with try and catch, which is you're supposed to use in, you can use it in async functions instead of chaining the promises. And here it already gave me a large snippet for saving data in a database. Let's use a constant instead. Okay, and it already, so in this case it tried to pass all of the data from the input. Let's define this more specifically. So it thinks we need to add a title. I will try to add author as well. And year in which the book was released. So as you can see, it generates the snippets, but you usually need to do some fine-tuning and adjustments to better fit your current use case. And another use case for using Copilot, where I think it actually might fit a lot better, is for generating tests. Because there you usually tend to have quite a lot of repetitive things, and it's pretty good at actually picking up what you want to do there. So I'll import the AWS library, because we'll need to mock it. So in this case, it actually didn't give me a correct path. I need to fix it. So yeah, once I started typing a typical test block, it already knew that how to complete it. So and provides a snippet for one of simple test case where we check if the function is actually creating a new entry, and provide already some data. Let's add author. So it actually provides some data based on the context for example, the Lord of the Rings book. But you never really know if it's 100% correct, because maybe someone actually, there's a lot of data in GitHub, and not everything is accurate or fits your current use case. Let's mock the AWS call to the DB, so we actually can run it locally. So it already knows how to write mocks for a specific part of the function. We need it. Let's see if the test is actually working. Okay, so we can see the status code is correct, but there's something missing in the response. So in the test, we also need to mock the ID. So we can here. So we need to add another import. here Copilot help me again. And let's add the mock here. So it picked the correct function that we used in the other file, and yeah, also selected the local variable that we used before. And here we also need to add that value here. This time okay, now it actually suggests adding the whole other data block as well. And now the test is passing. And let's see if the Copilot is going to help us with another test case. Okay, that gives us another test case where there is an error. It sees how what we defined in the previous test case, and for the mocking, and uses the same prompts here as well. But in this case, the promise from the backend gets rejected instead of succeeding like in the other case. Let's see if it has, okay. It doesn't have a code completion for us for the whole thing. Sometimes it gives larger completion blocks. Sometimes it just gives one line by line. It's, yeah. Okay. No. We still didn't finish that. Okay. Okay, I think we missed something here. So Copilot helped us here again. And let's previously, each time I try to run this, some of the parts got slightly changed. For example, here the return body was different previously. Let's see if. Okay. So, and yeah. This should do it. Now we have 2 tests passing. So that's all from me. Back to you, Muntis.
Okay, thanks, Davis, for the demonstration. I've now used Copilot for kind of playing around with it and see what it offers. And I really noticed by going back to some of my Jupyter notebooks that I've written some time ago and just seeing how it works there, that it's really great for operations where, especially for me in Python, many of you might know that there's a library pandas to do some tabular data manipulations, and I find myself going back and to the documentation often just to see, okay, so do I need it to aggregate first? Do I need it to group by first? And some logic like that, especially if I haven't used it for some time. And then it's really great to also incentivize writing, okay, so I want to achieve this thing, it will generate a code. Sometimes you need to do some adjustments, sometimes by being clever in comments using the correct kind of references to other parts of code, it will generate larger parts, and it's all good. It tries to generate code kind of going onwards, so it doesn't always read all of the context, or if you try to edit it or do something to a larger existing like class or modules or something like that, it will give you shorter suggestions, still super useful, but not as amazing as generating whole tests from few keystrokes. I always want to generate some drama or some ideas around things like this, as most of the AI applications, some of them you can debate about how legal or ethical or right the things are. So in this case, GitHub itself claims that in the projects, and it's more specifically in the files where the Copilot is enabled, GitHub states that it generates around a bit less than half of the code. The kind of large discussion around this one could be, so it's trained on openly available data sources in GitHub, meaning that it's reading large projects and using that for learning. But a lot of these projects have free and open source software, or short for FOSS licenses, like MIT license and things like that. And they have some kind of restrictions on how the data can be used. So you typically can use all of the code, but you need to add the kind of reference to original authors. And in this case, since it's generating new code, technically you're not using code directly, but the whole model was trained on somewhat proprietary code, right? So it's a little bit debatable on how it could be used. For now, it's all good and all clear to be used, but I think this will show some interesting discussions in the future as well. Similar with the image generation neural networks, where you give it some prompt to generate something. Once those start getting used to generate something that you have to pay money for, like AI art, then the question comes, okay, shouldn't part of the money go back to the authors whose work was used to actually train these models? So what's next in the Copilot? They are actually working, and it's ready on GPT-3, the kind of edit and insert options. You can see the article in the blog itself, but you can give it prompts to rewrite codes in specific formats. So for example, here, the implementation of Fibonacci, they wanted to improve the kind of complexity of a code, and it works as well. So edits and inserts, which currently seems to be a bit more limited. It's great at generating code kind of onwards, but not so much editing existing ones. That's already in the works. Not yet in the Copilot, but probably really soon. And another kind of comment when we're touching this is that since it's generated on GitHub code, we know probably half of the GitHub users are someone who was assigned in school to create a GitHub account and write a simple mathematic Fibonacci calculator or card deck and things like that. So these examples work extremely well. It will generate a whole file for you. More complex examples, as given to use specific libraries in Azure or AWS and things like that, it's sometimes a bit more picky about how long examples it will give you. There are alternatives to this as well. For some time, there's a tool called Kite, which is quite similar idea, but it's not trying to generate large parts of the code. It's just trying to suggest you essentially a smarter autocomplete via not only completing the current function or variable, but also the kind of whole line or the whole set of inputs. And their kind of catch is to try to do it with smarter suggestions. They are differently ordered, and it will look at other variables and understand your code to some level to give you suggestions as well. And that's more or less it for today from me. Of course, this and other kind of interesting things to go and explore. We do that at Emergn, and you're free to kind of always join us. We always have many open positions in different locations. You can go emergn.com opportunities and see what's available. So maybe we can become colleagues. And that's it. If you have some questions for me, or if you want to discuss the ethic aspects of using AI to write your code, or just generally want to strike up a conversation, feel free to add me via LinkedIn. I think I'm only Muntis Rudzītis, so that should be good. So that's it. Thank you, everyone, and catch me around if you want to talk about this.
I would say we have like 5 minutes for questions if you have any.
Time for evil questions. Yeah. Actually, I can't say much about JavaScript itself. Yeah, but if we talk about real life experience, for example, in Python, from my experience, actually, often GitHub Copilot often needs quite a long and informative description in the comment to generate some meaningful code. From my perspective, at least, yeah, kind of a little bit annoying, but okay. Just to keep in mind, yeah, and often it really even the word positions depends which word you put in which position. It sometimes depends which code will be generated. Yeah, just keep it in mind. If you don't satisfied with the generated code, just try to play with the words.
So that was comment, not question, right?
It's about comment line before the actual code will be generated. Yeah, and often also from my experience, it works better when you first try to enter the comment, like kind of description of what you expect, and then try to create the procedure name with the meaningful name of this procedure, and then just wait for Copilot to work. Second kind of partially funny question, why do you think it's so expensive? After half a year, almost a year of testing, I've expected it will be not more than $5 a month. What's your opinion about it?
Yeah, so I'm gonna repeat. I'm not sure if the camera caught the first comment. So the comment was about that it's generally great. It works better when you provide it kind of a description, a comment on what you're trying to do. So it has a bit more context on what you're trying to do. And then from my experience as well, if you start to type in like the class and the class variable or variable name and things like that, it will try to complete, and that usually works a bit faster than just kind of waiting for while the code is being generated from the scratch. So that was the comment part. And the question was about why is it so expensive? That's a good question, especially for a company whose original idea was to provide free AI for the humanity. Interesting thing, I think once the GPT-2 was released and people saw a huge potential in it, my personal opinion is that there is a lot of uses for GPT-3 in a bad way, since you can, if I was an evil person, I would generate scammer bots that would act like humans and would message people and have GPT-3 behind it running on computer somewhere. So I think they were a bit worried on releasing such technology kind of completely openly. So starting GPT-3, it's available through the OpenAI API, which has some cost related to it as well, or at least usage quota. And then for the Copilot, I'm not sure. I also agree that $10 per month is a lot. At the same time, if it's a tool that you use daily and it improves your productivity, and if you can kind of show it, then $10 for a developer in company per month is on company scale probably not that much. So it's not probably that much for the private use. It's probably more for commercial clients.
Yeah.
So comment guy in the.
Quite a little.
Okay.
Question.
Oh, yeah.
From my perspective, it's ugly, but maybe I can just kind of cook it.
So I haven't tried it. There is a code whisperer by kind of Amazon, right? Which is trying to do a similar thing. I would say they're like step behind on what this is doing. They are more, so they come from different backgrounds, right? They have code and they want to do the code completion, while the OpenAI started with, okay, we want to do a larger task. We want to understand language. We want to have translation to 10 different languages, understand concept, and try their best shot at generating artificial general intelligence, right? And they ended up with this question answering thing that generates code or language prompts and things like that. And so it's a subtask, and for them it's similar, but Amazon is probably going the other way around. They're going like more like bottom up. So we have lots of code, we have lots of examples, how good kind of prompts we can give you. But yeah, I haven't tried it firsthand. I know it exists. The Kite tool I show you as well, it's also similar concept. It's AI driven, not as huge. And I think there will be many more examples in the future. I think if we look 5 to 10 years back, things like automatic code generation, like you define a class and few variables, and it will generate some views, HTMLs, and typical like web frameworks and things like that. That was a thing back then. Now it's kind of the next iteration of that. It's trying to generalize it a bit. So thanks for the questions and comments. Anyone else? The guy in the greenish shirt, yellowish, greenish. So kind of two parts look at this. One is the current context. From that, it looks at your code as well. So other files in the same folders, essentially the same Git repo, it will look into, and it will kind of try to like read classes from the files next to it, things like that. But some existing code completion tools also does that. It also learns from the way on how you create code. So if you have a typical way of naming variables and things like that, it will try to kind of autocomplete on similar kind of style going onwards.
And the second part is where does it run? Since it also requires subscription, it doesn't run locally, right?
No. So the question is, where does it run? It runs in the cloud, in the GitHub. So technically, you're sending your code to them and then getting it back. Might seem potentially evil, at least for a skeptic like me. Then at the same time, you store all of your code in the GitHub anyway.
Code, yes, but tokens, secrets, some private stuff.
So for those stuff, it's another kind of great use. It's typically generating a good practice code, meaning if you're if you're defining variable that reads the local, if you're trying to define like a secret variable, it will more often generate examples of how to read it from some local config file, local environment variable, things like that, rather than giving someone else's secret who accidentally was committed to the GitHub.
Yeah, but if there is some local config, what is JSON, that's code for the tool, it technically can send it somewhere for analysis.
Yeah, it technically could. I think a lot of the code completion tools, they all read your Git folder, right? So you kind of trust them to not do evil things with your secrets.
They don't send it anywhere, otherwise it would be a big problem.
Yeah, you would think that, but VS Code has a bunch of telemetry built in as well, unless you use the
VS Code
yeah. It's of course a lot of privacy and secrecy questions around it. So I think that's for everyone's own decision to use it or not. So thanks for the question. Any more questions?
We have 3 hands. If there will be any more hands, then now we take questions only from these 3 hands. Everything else then come directly to Muntis.
Yeah, you can strike me a conversation after. The guy in the green, blue shirt.
Yeah, so you said this phrase good practice. Answering previous question, my question is related. There is this, so you mentioned in your talk that comments are used to train the model. So comments found in code. And there is this book that is well known in the software community called Clean Code by Robert Martin. And there's a section about comments that states basically, which is an arguable thing, so that can be discussed, but it states that a comment in code can be on its own an indicator of not good code, because that means that the function name is not self-explanatory. The parameters are not, so you need to, the other guy who will be reading your code needs additional context, additional information to understand what it's doing. And so do you know, I don't know if GitHub shares this information, but if you know the answer, how repositories, there are hundreds of thousands of repositories in GitHub available in public, how the repositories were weighted. Is there any algorithm that takes into account the potential quality of, like, if it's a well-known framework that is likely developed by skilled engineers, then it has like a priority. The code that comes from this repository has a priority when Copilot will suggest you code snippets.
So just to quickly rephrase, I'm not sure again if it's going into the recording. So the question is around the quality of the code. Since it's trained on the GitHub, does it have any prioritization on the code openly available there? And my answer is I know a little bit about it. I know they did some kind of pre-processing of the code. They do some filtering. I think they apply some trying to kind of score how of a quality a product is. Otherwise, I would assume if we go by numbers, there's probably more repositories with bad code and fewer ones with larger, better code. So I hope they did some proper filtering to that one. And I want to comment a little bit about your comment about comments in the code. I do agree with that statement that in generally, as we all know, programming languages try to mimic English language to some level to be understandable. You would want to write it in a way that it links back to it. And so I agree with that. And as I showed you an example, you should give descriptions about larger blocks and things and concepts of things like, okay, I'm defining a card deck, things like that, rather than saying, okay, here we are assigning a variable to a secret, right? This is bad commenting style. Of course, it will probably give better hint to the Copilot what to generate, but it works well with these kind of higher level comments as well. So yeah, your mileage may vary. So thanks for the question.
I have a question
Next one.
about Copilot settings. You showed there are settings that code should be unique and code can be used to train in future. What this first setting, code should be unique, affect or didn't affect how its code is generated from your experience?
So the question is about these checkboxes. I'm going to quickly jump back.
Yes.
So here, about what does this actually do, and the second one. I think the second one, yeah, it's the typical GDPR, can we use telemetry? The first one is about matching public code. So once it's generating the suggestions in the panel, in the VS Code, for example, you can see it offering you up to 10 suggestions for a prompt. Here it allows for you to filter out things that match one-to-one to public repositories, meaning that it will prefer and filter those out, and it will give you kind of uniquely generated code with maybe less common used things, or maybe not give you as large parts of the code as you might expect. I haven't really played around with it as much to comment on whether it's significantly worse than without clicking it. So that's it. Thanks. One last question, the guy in the back.
Yes. Don't you think that writing code sometimes is faster and easier than writing explicit comments?
So the question is, do I think that writing a good code is sometimes faster and more understandable than writing long comments? My personal answer is yes. It can be like that, especially if you're working on the code yourself. If you have to work with the coworkers, work on a larger system, different modules, something you come back in a couple months, or your colleague will work on it in the next week, then you should try to write the code as self-explanatory as possible, but you should add some, for more complex parts, you should add some comments.
So this is why also I would like to suggest, I personally tried Copilot and I think it's quite good for auto-completion, like better
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the comment.
Okay, thank you. If there are any more questions, then you come to Muntis and Davis right now. Aldis will do, what's the word in English?
Walkthrough.
Organize.
Organize
Tour.
to the premises. So thank you very much.